Welcome to Tokyo Wave, recorded in a live studio in Harajuku, Japan, with your hosts Aaron and Parker. All right, everyone, welcome to episode 75 of Tokyo Wave. We're your hosts, Aaron Randall
and Parker Allen. On Tokyo Wave, we bring you weekly updates from our studio in Harajuku.
Join us in segments featuring this week's top news,
political happenings,
business,
and other random garbage.
To get us started, here are this week's top news highlights.
Shibuya mayor calls for restraint in gathering downtown for Halloween.
Shinsei Bank rejects SBI's tender offer, set for hostile takeover.
U.S. servicemen arrested in Tokyo for suspected possession and use of LSD.
This week in Japan. All right, our first story. Shibuya mayor calls for restraint in gathering downtown for Halloween.
The Mainichi has reported that in response to the expected increase in Halloween crowds at the end of October, Tokyo's Shibuya ward announced measures on October 21st, including tightened security and a request for some stores to refrain from selling alcohol.
Halloween will be celebrated on October 31st after the Tokyo Metropolitan Government's planned lifting of all requests on October 25th to shorten business hours and restrict the serving of alcohol at restaurants and bars that have been certified as having taken thorough countermeasures against the coronavirus. Despite these easings of restrictions, the ward government is urging people to refrain from gathering in Shibuya for Halloween.
That's right, kids. The restrictions are gone, but no Halloween for you. According to the Shibuya ward government, apart from Metropolitan Police Department security personnel, ward employees will patrol the downtown area around Shibuya Station in teams of 3 to caution against street drinking, and about 100 private security guards will be assigned to the area. Wow.
They're gonna take away our ability to street drink here in Japan?
During Halloween?
Oh no. I'm worried this is gonna set a precedent.
All those fun times are coming to an end.
Yeah.
In addition, Shibuya has requested 42 shops, including convenience stores, mass merchandisers, and private stores, to refrain from selling alcohol on both October 30 and October 31st from 6 p.m. to 5 a.m. the next morning.
Wow, they know well. They're going after the convenience. That's where all the foreigners like to gather, Family Mart in Shibuya. Do you know about this?
That's the spot.
So last year, the ward office held online events as part of Virtual Shibuya for people to enjoy Halloween at home. The event will be held again this year with enhanced content.
Enhanced. Yep. So last year in 2020, due to the spread of the coronavirus, the turnout in the area was down significantly and there were no major disruptions. This year, however, the number of people infected with the coronavirus in the capital has decreased, and the timing of the event will be right after the lifting of restrictions on the serving of alcohol at restaurants and bars. In other words, it's gonna be a party. To make matters worse, as Halloween also falls on a Sunday this year, the turnout is almost certain to increase.
Shibuya Ward Mayor Ken Hasebe said, "I would like to ask for your cooperation to keep the city safe and secure by observing morals and manners. I also hope that people will have fun through virtual Shibuya and the like."
Yeah, I think there's still going to be drunk people in sexy outfits.
Oh, yeah.
And guess what? That will bring people to Shibuya, security guards or none.
Yeah, I do think the numbers won't be as crazy just because Japan is closed off to tourists still, and Halloween's become such like a time for tourists, especially Western tourists, to come to Japan to enjoy the Shibuya Halloween. But I mean, gosh, like they're just lifting all the restrictions and then putting this
It's going to be a banger. I mean, it's interesting to see. I mean, Shibuya really has declared war on Halloween. And given the pandemic, it's understandable, but at the same time, those damn kids, they sure do like getting drunk and wearing costumes. So it's sort of inevitable.
Yeah. I'd love to just this year kind of peek at what's going on, you know?
And the people watching is really the most fun on Halloween because people come out dressed to the nines. And I mean, Japan has this vibrant costume culture.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I will say I refrained. I think after 2017, I stopped going because it just got way too crazy. Like, I remember the last year I went, people were throwing like heavy whiskey bottles like across from
it was insanity. Like, I mean, and even before the pandemic, Shibuya had already started, tightening up the measures to sort of tone down the insanity because, of course, people getting drunk and wild is, Friday and Saturday night in Tokyo. So there's nothing weird about that.
Yeah.
But the problem with Halloween is just the manners that people, or the lack thereof, were exhibiting and throwing trash on the street and just generally, getting drunk and starting fights. And it really got out of hand.
For sure. It's, I think the past, 2019, I really enjoyed watching just the live news and the police trying to control the situation. And they've got those mobile, what are they called? Prisons or like the temporary like holding facilities.
Yeah. And they had the DJ police. And I mean, it's like something you would see in a movie. It's like, is this really happening?
Yeah. All right. And up next, Shinsei Bank rejects SBI's tender offer set for hostile takeover.
Kyodo News has reported that Japan's Shinsei Bank said on October 21st it has decided to reject a tender offer by major online financial group SBI Holdings, setting the stage for what might be the first hostile takeover bid in the country's banking history.
Shinsei criticized SBI for attempting to effectively control the management without taking a majority stake, describing it as detrimental to other shareholders. The medium-sized lender also said SBI's price in the tender offer was too low to reflect its true value.
After weeks of heightened tensions since the September launch of the unsolicited offer, Shinsei did not completely shut the door on SBI. It flagged the possibility of supporting their bid if certain conditions are met by SBI ahead of a November 25th shareholders meeting, a scenario immediately rejected by the hostile buyer.
Shinsei Bank President Hideyuki Kudo told a briefing, "The offer doesn't match the common interests of our shareholders," adding the bank will seek a friendly bidder to counter SBI.
SBI is seeking to raise its stake from the current 20% to 48%, offering 2,000 yen or 17 USD per share.
The financial group is aiming to become the fourth Japanese megabank, with its CEO, Yoshitaka Kitao, calling for the reorganization of regional banks in Japan.
After a board meeting on October 21st, Shinsei urged SBI to remove the limit on its share purchase and raise its offer price to an appropriate level from the current 2,000 yen if it wanted to win the bank's support.
In a quick response, however, SBI said it would not change its plan. The group said it was legitimate to have an upper limit to ensure that it can increase shareholdings swiftly and revamp the Shinsei management.
The removal of the limit would require it to seek regulatory approval, which would take time, according to SBI. Under Japanese law, obtaining a majority stake in a bank requires regulatory approval.
SBI said the price of 2,000 yen per share offers a decent premium on Shinsei shares and dismissed the bank's argument that the purchase plan will work to the detriment of the remaining shareholders.
The group's outright rejection boosted the likelihood that the standoff will continue, despite Shinsei President Kudo expressing a desire to talk with SBI.
With the tender offer, SBI is aiming to replace some or all of the current Shinsei management, which has failed to bolster the bank's profitability and pave the way for the repayment of massive public funds the bank's predecessor received 2 decades ago.
A bit of a history lesson: following the 1998 collapse of Shinsei's predecessor, the Long-Term Credit Bank of Japan, the bank received around 370 billion yen in taxpayer money. Ironically, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida worked for the Long-Term Credit Bank of Japan prior to entering politics.
The Japanese government still owns around 20% of Shinsei, and one focal point is how it will react to SBI's latest move.
SBI acquiesced to Shinsei in late September and extended the tender offer period until December 8th from its original offer of October 25th, after Shinsei threatened to launch part of its defensive measures.
Shinsei's planned defense, pending approval at an extraordinary shareholders meeting in November, is to issue new shares to existing shareholders to dilute SBI's holdings.
I think we're headed to a standoff.
It sounds like it. Wow. Going after the big banks.
It's interesting because Shinsei Bank, of course, is the bank of choice for a lot of foreigners living in Japan, and that is for a very obvious reason. It's one of the few banks that doesn't charge ridiculous fees when trying to obtain money from overseas, especially in foreign currencies.
Right. I remember working at a real estate company, and all of our foreign tenants had Shinsei.
But Shinsei, of course, is not as popular as some other banks, and I think they have not really captured the business very effectively compared to their competitors. And it's tough for banks these days because real estate is expensive and people are using physical banks less and less. So it's hard for a bank with fewer branches to, what's the word? Branch out?
No, for sure. And I mean, this is going to be a tough fight. Japanese banks, I mean, I've heard some very financially gifted friends comments on that, Japanese banks actually control most of the world financial markets for many reasons, right? They have long ties. A lot of the banks are tied in with Zaibatsu, right, here in Japan. So, if you're getting ready to fight against them, yeah, it's a battle that is not going to be easily won, if not already determined to be lost.
One, it's an interesting topic, the consolidation of Japan's banks, because, if you'll remember, after the bubble burst, a lot of banks went defunct, and of course the predecessor to Shinsei, the LTCB, did exactly that. And so essentially it was bailed out by the Japanese government and became Shinsei Bank, which of course is funny. Shinsei meaning new life. Yeah,
right.
The taxpayer money bankrolled that new life. But we'll see what happens next.
For sure.
Up next, U.S. serviceman arrested in Tokyo for suspected possession and use of LSD.
The Mainichi also reported a U.S. serviceman was arrested on October 19th on suspicion of possession and use of LSD in the capital.
So the suspect, a Japan-based serviceman in his 20s, stands accused of violating the Narcotics and Psychotropics Control Act by the Metropolitan Police Department's Azabu Police Station. Yeah, that police station. He has reportedly admitted to the allegations.
The charges against him include possession of 3 stamp-like pieces of LSD-soaked blotting paper in the Roppongi district in Tokyo's Minato ward on the morning of October 9th. A urine test he took apparently came back positive for LSD. He was quoted as telling the police that he bought the drugs at a bar in Shinjuku on the night of October 8th.
Wonder what kind of bar that was.
I've only heard stories, but if anything goes down, it usually goes down in Shinjuku.
I'm a bit suspicious though, because, especially US military in Japan, there of course are persistent rumors that there's a lot of drugs that change hands on US military bases. And obviously if they get busted on the base, it's a US military problem, but if they get busted On the local economy in Japan, it is an entirely different matter.
For sure.
So, according to the Azabu police station, the suspect was off duty when he visited the bar in the capital's Shinjuku ward on the night of October 8th. So, I guess he wasn't looking for terrorists. He is believed to have gone to Roppongi while heavily intoxicated, surprise, after drinking alone. Yeah, sounds like quite a dude. He was arrested on suspicion of assault after getting into trouble with a male office worker, also in his 20s, on a sidewalk at around 7:30 a.m. the following day, and punching the worker in the face, leaving him with minor injuries.
Yikes. Sounds like an epic night out. Turn for the worst.
I can just imagine the U.S. serviceman saying to police, "Oh man, I thought it was a dragon, man. I was trying to slay the dragon. Whoa, what's going on with all of your arms?"
Yikes. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it on the show before, and most people listening probably know, but I mean, you just can't do these kinds of recreational drugs in Japan. It's hyper illegal. It's always surprising, though, to hear that these Americans that come to Japan, end up partaking in it. A lot of them are the ones here that are here short term, right? So they don't really know like how deep this goes, like illegally speaking, right?
I guess they don't do that for the U.S. military's training of new people in Japan. Don't drop LSD in Shinjuku. It's not a good idea. Like, Uncle Sam has to tell people not to do that, I guess.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. In America, recreational marijuana has become legalized in many, many states. And when I go back to the States, it's difficult having conversations about, marijuana, whatever, because Americans just don't believe it. And you tell them, yes, it's illegal, but it's like they don't listen. They're not listening and they don't understand. And some Americans or people like this guy come here and do it, and then they get in this kind of trouble. And this guy's totally screwed.
And it's sort of frustrating because if he was like us and he was just a, random foreigner in Japan, he would be royally screwed, and he'd probably, of course, face jail time.
Yeah.
And then, of course, being basically kicked out of the country and banned for X number of years.
Oh, yeah.
However, as U.S. military, these things quickly get swept under the rug, and he'll probably have to go back home with a slap on the wrist, but that's probably it.
Yeah.
I can imagine, though, back at the base, Sarge is probably making him drop and do a lot.
Yeah.
I just imagine some U.S. sergeant or whoever is in charge of this guy being, "You maggot, I can't believe you were dropping LSD in Shinjuku. You're shit. You're less than shit.
But tell me, son, how was it? Was it good?"
Back in the 70s, I used to do, you only had 3 blotter papers. That's little sissy stuff.
But son, listen, you can't do that here in Japan. It's illegal.
Go back home to Florida. Go, smoke some bath salt. Walk it off.
Eat somebody, go to Miami. All right, and up next on Yana Yana Bill, y'all, we'll be talking about WeWork and how it's finally going public.
You're now listening to Tokyo Wave.
So if you go back into the annals of Tokyo Wave history, you will be able to listen to us talking trash about WeWork, the insane startup, and SoftBank's controversial bankrolling of the operation and how that quickly went sour. So WeWork is now finally going public, but will SoftBank ever get its $17 billion back? This is the question. A recent Bloomberg article talks about how in venture capital, the first investment in a startup is almost always the most lucrative. Unfortunately, however, for Masayoshi Son, this is not the case for SoftBank's investment in WeWork. In that case, perhaps SoftBank's best deal was its last.
In an unusual culmination of a strange partnership between the two companies, SoftBank will finally get a chance to start recouping some of the more than $17 billion it poured into WeWork as the company has listed its shares on the New York Stock Exchange with the ticker symbol WE. We took your money.
That's definitely what it stands for. So the complex combination of share purchases, convertible loans, warrants, tender offers, and letters of credit, some of which have been renegotiated, make it difficult for analysts to tell whether SoftBank could ever turn a profit on its investment. And surprise! Representatives for WeWork and SoftBank declined to comment to Bloomberg.
David Gibson, chief investment advisor at Asterisk Advisory Japan, said that after so much went wrong, a lot would need to go right for SoftBank to make money on the startup. WeWork would need to capture a large portion of the post-pandemic workforce and hope that flexible offices take the place of many corporate campuses and home workstations. It would also need to dramatically improve its financial position. The chief investment advisor said, "It's possible."
Alex Snyder, a portfolio manager at Center Square Investment Management, a real estate-focused investor, said that victory for SoftBank could simply mean breaking even. He said, quote, "Coming out more or less whole, given the WeWork saga, could be a win in people's minds."
So to recap, the saga began in 2010 when Adam Neumann co-created a co-working space in New York. Investors lined up behind him, drawn to his infectious optimism and large ambitions. Masayoshi Son, the founder of SoftBank, became one of them in 2017 with an initial outlay of $4.4 billion in a deal valuing WeWork at $20 billion. In January 2019, SoftBank pushed the valuation to $47 billion.
Wasn't that initial investment basically promised to him like on a piece of paper in the back of a car?
Something like that, yeah.
And things unfortunately went downhill from there. An attempt to sell an initial public offering later that year was a disaster. No thanks to articles or exposés rather that came out showing Adam Neumann as a freewheeling crazy dude who was doing bong rips on private jets and having booze-fueled parties at the office and doing all sorts of crazy things. For instance, of course, mixing personal and business expenses. Then, of course, reality struck. Wall Street rejected the proposed valuation. The ballooning losses and Neumann's apparent conflicts of interest, including questionable transactions and loans he took from the business. Neumann was ousted as CEO. WeWork almost went broke, and SoftBank had to bail out the company with more than $5 billion in new financing.
Yo, Son, I really appreciate your interest, man, but, I just don't do contracts, so how about we just do this on a napkin, like $4.4 billion? Sounds good to me. Could you just, sign this napkin, man?
I feel like I've met this guy Neumann, so many times.
He's like a textbook startup, bro.
Yeah. God, people that don't want to do contracts drive me insane. They did because they've never done contracts. How did this guy get to this position,
And you know what I'm sure pisses off the shareholders more than anyone else is that Neumann guy is gone from WeWork, but he's still rich.
Yeah. Golden parachute, right?
Talk about a guy who would probably get arrested in Shinjuku for possessing LSD.
Yeah, I know, right? In another dimension. So SoftBank's choice to save WeWork rather than let it collapse as SoftBank would later do with Katera Inc. and Greensill Capital is noteworthy. SoftBank was on the hook for a $1.5 billion warrant it had already promised WeWork. Son told investors 2 years ago that he looked into getting out of it but couldn't extract SoftBank from the commitment because of that damn napkin. So he piled more cash into the beleaguered company, including $5.05 billion in debt and guarantees and a $1.5 billion settlement that reworked a tender offer to purchase shares from Newman and others.
This just in, Newman was reported surfing naked with supermodels on the beach in Hawaii.
I gotta find Newman's Instagram. I wonder if he's like still posting about his rich and luxurious life, you know?
And on the surfboard, he had a bong in one hand and a fistful of cash in the other. So a key piece of information from this timing is that SoftBank also negotiated a better deal. WeWork agreed to reduce the price of shares tied to the previously promised warrant to $11.60 apiece from the original $110. It's a pretty good discount. Also, as a part of a $1.75 billion credit guarantee and $2.2 billion in senior unsecured debt, SoftBank got the right to buy shares at 1 cent each. It's a fire sale. Also, earlier this year, SoftBank bought 130 million shares at a penny each. It gets 40 million more of those penny warrants when WeWork lists, and another 12 million if the letter of credit is extended in 2023, which, given WeWork's situation, sounds kind of likely.
So WeWork will start trading at about $10, assuming the company eventually pays back the debt. SoftBank's gain on those warrants could be substantial, far in excess of any of its other investments in WeWork.
Partially because those initial investments kind of sucked. The public valuation for WeWork is about $9 billion, less than a fifth of what SoftBank paid in 2019. But because of accounting conventions, those sneaky accountants, SoftBank will essentially start with a clean slate. WeWork's lowest point, according to SoftBank disclosures, was that the PowerPoint slide with the unicorn jumping over the Valley of Darkness?
No, I think it was the slide with the hockey stick on the graph.
So that lowest point was in early 2020, after the botched IPO and at the beginning of the pandemic. For the quarter ending in March 2020, SoftBank assigned WeWork a valuation of $2.9 billion, and SoftBank shareholders reacted accordingly.
I feel like SoftBank's in like a, what do you call it? An abusive relationship with WeWork. They just keep giving them money. They don't stop. What was the original, the Vision Fund? It was 100 billion?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about that actually. So in reality, of course, SoftBank is still in a very deep hole. The company and its Vision Fund, aptly named, put $16.9 billion into WeWork in both equity and debt. That doesn't include a $430 million personal loan to Newman or $105 million in other payments to Newman to support the private jets and bong rips, I guess.
Why the hell would he need that money, like, to close the deal?
Listen, Sam, I like this deal, but I'm going to need a personal check for 430 million USD.
This is a conversation that actually happened.
Wow, man. But hey, props to him. But God, Son, man. I hate to criticize Son, but is he that gullible?
Are you stupid, son?
Come on, man.
However, this hole does include $3.85 billion that WeWork hasn't tapped, the $1.75 billion credit guarantee, and $1.1 billion in senior secured debt.
If WeWork performs as outlined by its executives, it could hit $1 billion in earnings before interest and other expenses by 2023. If the market starts valuing the company in line with other franchise businesses such as hotels, then the company could conceivably hit a valuation north of $15 billion by 2023. At that point, SoftBank, which will have a roughly 56% ownership stake after the listing, will be getting closer to breaking even.
This is like a masterclass in throwing money at a problem until it doesn't become a problem anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've got $100 billion, right? I guess you can do that.
Capitalism, baby. It's complicated. Aswath Damodaran, a professor of finance at New York University's Stern School of Business, said that SoftBank will not make money on WeWork. The unanswered question is how much they will lose. He continued that WeWork's business model remains unproven and its substantial long-term rent commitments and short-term tenant contracts muddy the prospects for the company to ever turn a profit.
So WeWork's demise and its ability to stay alive, I think, are the same thing. So as Aswath said, WeWork systemically injected itself into a very old system, right, where it's between these long-term rent commitments and the short-term tenant contracts, and you can't get rid of it. It's like a virus, right? Putting yourself in between those two things, because it's become part of the mechanism that makes a lot of the real estate investments that it's attached to continue to work. No, who's going to work these days, especially in the US and like European countries? I mean, everything's going remote.
And that's the thing. Pre-pandemic, these co-working spaces really looked like a breath of fresh air for the modern business, who had employees who didn't need to go into a physical office every day to work with thousands of other people in the same place. Obviously, companies through the pandemic have discovered that they don't necessarily need to shift this big office to a bunch of distributed offices, but rather there's also another option out there. No office.
Exactly.
And so where co-working spaces are going to fit into this mix as the way people work has fundamentally changed is still up for question.
You know, I've got an idea for WeWork that I would pitch to them. WeWork should be like the Chinese offshore equivalent of the way Americans use like the Cayman Islands to like register their companies to avoid taxes. So all of these WeWork locations can be potential addresses for CCP regulated companies to use to hide their money.
I'm sure that's not happening.
Maybe a bad idea, but they've got to do something. I mean, when I was traveling before the pandemic, WeWork was everywhere, right? When all this news was going out that they're like, you know, totally screwed. So like I said, they're systemically injected into this kind of real estate / short-term renting / co-working ecosystem. And I don't think they're going to go away. Maybe that's why Solon just has to keep giving them money, because they kind of are stuck there.
Well, and I think that co-working spaces still have a place in the office space mix. And I mean, office space itself is kind of absurd because having these, you know, prime rent locations is extremely costly for companies. And as we've figured out during the pandemic, a lot of these office spaces have been going unused for almost 2 years now.
Right.
But then the question becomes, if we didn't need to use office spaces at all, do we need WeWork?
I think the obvious answer is no. But then they look at the contracts and like, wait, but WeWork's like tied into this for 30 years. And that's like all over the world, right? In all major cities. Like they expanded so quickly.
One, I think the big bet that WeWork made is that a lot of the blue chip and big invested Silicon Valley companies of the world would use WeWork as sort of this perk for their employees, that instead of having to go to the company's office and of course live near the company's office and pay whatever rent happens to be prevalent around the company's office, they could use WeWorks in potentially a more convenient location and essentially work remotely.
Right.
However, if you can work remotely, do you need to work for a co-working space or can't you just work from home? It really calls into question, what is going to be the future of in-person collaboration? Because I think one of the things, at least in Japan, that WeWork was trying to promote was that its environments were more creativity boosting than regular offices. And if you've ever been in a major Japanese company's office, it's tough to discredit that because most offices suck.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, WeWork it's cool. It's definitely not what I would like to use. I think, almost it's a little bit too manufactured for my taste. But of course, I'm not a blue chip company. So, free beer after 5 p.m. might sound like a great investment to a startup bro or a magnate of world business.
For sure. At the same time, here in Tokyo, there's other good options that are non-WeWork, right? Really good co-working spaces that really foster creativity, that are a lot less processed and just feel very organic, and you feel free working there.
I'm not a slave to my job.
But it's going to be really interesting to watch WeWork's stock and valuation, because like I was saying, like they're systemically in the system. You can't get rid of them. And Son just keeps giving him money, right? So, because they're trying to get, the break even or whatever on their investment. So it will be really interesting to watch what happens going forward.
Yeah, as of this recording, their stock price is at $11.59, which is, of course, above the opening price of $10. It, of course, just started on the stock market, debuting just 2 days before the podcast recording we're having today. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, I'm sure Masayoshi Son is quietly looking at his computer screen and wondering if his penny investments are ever going to pay off.
Yeah.
But because of his investments in robotics, maybe he can make an animatronic unicorn that he can use to fly through the skies to the future.
Actually, I don't know if you've seen it. The Boston Dynamics dog, they finally put a gun on it.
Took him a while.
Yeah, but no, that was a good investment. Boston Dynamics. Oh my God. Talk about a Black Mirror episode. I mean, when I saw there's just some really short footage of the dog with a military grade, I think automatic weapon on it, but
maybe that's why SoftBank is getting rid of Pepper. They're secretly pulling up a stockpile of armorized peppers that can make Adam Newman's life a living hell. He wakes up in the morning and outside the door, thousands of peppers.
Yeah. I criticized Son earlier, but I mean, he obviously has a good understanding of the military industrial complex in the U.S. and made a really good investment in those dog robots that might end up wiping out humans in the near short term.
So the moral of the story, if you're going to bankroll a weird co-working space startup led by a bro who likes private jets and bongs, you got to have robot dogs with guns.
Exactly. Make sure to hedge your money. Diversity is key.
Diversity with guns.
Hey listeners, that's right, you listener right there.
Who do you think should be our next guest on Tokyo Wave? Let us know. Drop us a line at wave@tokyowave.jp.
We hope you enjoyed Tokyo Wave.
If you haven't already, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube.
Join us again next week on Tokyo Wave.